I'm a professor at Columbia University. I do research with drugs. So we bring people into the lab and we study the effects of drugs on the brain, on behavior, social interaction, sleep, food intake, a wide range of things. And I write extensively to try and change the way people think about drugs, because oftentimes the way they think about drugs is inaccurate. In terms of the ungas, I don't know what people were expecting from it. I mean, I know what I was expecting from it, nothing. And so I actually enjoyed it, because I got to see people like you and people from all around the world who are interested in this subject. But in terms of a document that had any sort of teeth or will have any meaning around the world, I don't know if this is the place to do it. No, I was not expecting some huge change. I live in the United States, where we have President Obama, and when he came to office, he said that we were going to end the drug war, and he said we're not using that language, and that was clever at some level, because he just basically adopted the rhetoric of the progressives, but the drug war continued, although the language changed, and so I'm not expecting much from these sort of governmental organizations. The groundswell has to come from the people, because these governmental officials are just full of shit. Diplomatic time, yeah. I don't know, man. I'm getting too old for this. The way I see it is just to call it like it is. And what we're doing with drugs, the way we're treating drugs around the world, it's just inappropriate.
Yeah.
And the major sort of energy or fuel for that perspective comes from the United States. So I'm trying to call them and call us on our bullshit. And until that happens, we recognize that, until some meaningful, real change happens in the United States, the world is fucked.
Yeah. I got you.
So when we think about protecting the youth, there are multiple issues that are going on. So we can think about brain development in general, and then we can think about what youth we're talking about protecting and that sort of thing. So if we think about some of the things that have happened in the United States with youth surrounding marijuana, let's think about Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, and his defense was that Trayvon Martin was intoxicated on marijuana, so he was so aggressive that he had to be killed. But let's think about in the Bronx. This is a great case. Ramarley Graham is his name. Didn't get much international press. Got press here in Ramarley Graham was on a street corner in the Bronx, and police officers thought he was selling marijuana. Chased him into his bathroom. Ramarley Graham went into the house. The officer kicked the door down in the bathroom, and he shot him in the bathroom because he thought he was selling marijuana. So when we talk about protecting youth, these sort of views about marijuana and the policies that follow justify the killing of these black and brown youth. So when they talk about protecting youth, they're not talking about them, they're not talking about black and brown youth in that respect. And so it's hypocritical. So me, a father of black boys like that, I am far more concerned about my kids interacting with the police than I am with my kids interacting with drugs. I would much prefer my kids interact with drugs than the police. So let's be clear when we talk about protecting youth and how that works. That's one thing. Now, from a neurobiological perspective, the developmental perspective, we have children around the globe who are on medications that affect the central nervous system. Drugs like antidepressants, drugs like that treats attention deficit disorder, like Adderall, drugs that treat anxiety. All of these are psychoactive drugs. You don't hear the conversation about protecting the youth because of their brain development. We don't talk about it in the same way. We only talk about protecting the youth and development with marijuana, which is, of course, hypocritical, but it also is not very scientific. We don't oftentimes think about the impact of Adderall and other psychotropic drugs that children take on the developing brain. Simply weigh the risk-benefit ratio in those cases. That is, do the benefits outweigh the risk? And we can make the situation favorable by simply decreasing the dose according to size. The same is true with marijuana. And this does not mean that we should be advocating that people should use psychoactive drugs at a young age. That's not what I'm saying. But people do, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be irreparably damaged. And just like they are not when we do psychotropic medication.
Yeah, and I think the few studies that always contradict themselves are talking about a real small percentage of IQ development. And regarding the brain,
we can talk about, it's only one study that talked about the IQ.
Yeah, I think they're talking about 21 points of IQ.
No, it's not. First of all, that study, you're talking about 19 people being compared. That's number one. Number two, the folks who smoke marijuana started off with higher IQ than everybody else. So the 19 who started smoking marijuana. And then what happened was that they simply came down to like the mean. And we're talking about this is a loss of IQ. You can't say that because initial IQ was taken when they were children. It could simply be that those folks now have jobs that do not use those cognitive skills. And so it is beguiling to even discuss that study without understanding.
They didn't have the brain exercises to develop.
I mean, there are people who do construction work today and they've been doing it for 25 years, but they may have started off in terms of IQ certainly above me. And now they may not be in terms of that IQ test. It doesn't mean that they're less bright than I am. It just simply means they don't have this kind of practice. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like musculation.
That's right. Absolutely. Cannabis and psychosis. That issue. The Lancet Psychiatry is the cannabis psychosis journal. By the way, every week they have a paper in there about that. So when we think about cannabis and psychosis, first of all, the effect is not the correlation. That's what it is. The correlation is not specific to cannabis. That is, when you look at those studies, you look at tobacco, correlation between tobacco and psychosis. You look at amphetamines, correlation between amphetamines and psychosis. That's one. So it's not specific to chemicals in cannabis, this correlation, nor is it specific to psychosis. So when you look at those drugs that I just said, so when we look at cannabis, there's a correlation between it and depression, it and anxiety. The same is true with tobacco. Same is true with amphetamine. So now, if anybody's talking about, by the way, in some cases, in many cases, those other drugs have stronger correlations to cannabis. So if anybody's talking about cannabis and psychosis alone, that's a license for you to stop listening, because either they are an idiot or they think you are an idiot, because that's just, it's inappropriate. Well, just like France, right? We had it was difficult, particularly to get the black community involved, or other despised sort of racial ethnic groups. Now, you have to understand that those groups have been vilified in society in general, and they don't want to be associated with any behaviors that might seem to be less than respectable. And so you can understand why they don't want to deal with this or be associated with this issue. Now, they need to be educated and informed that this issue is a way the society perpetuates racial discrimination. If they're not aware of that, then they won't be involved with this issue. And so the major sort of work that needs to be done is to make the connection between racial discrimination and the application of drug policies. And if you do that, then they will be on board. But if you don't make those connections, they just don't want to be seen as participating in another behavior that is seen less than respectable. Yeah, I don't know. Like, one of the things that I'm trying to do as I get older, I'm trying not to engage people who don't play by the rules of evidence, because they're a waste of my fucking time, and I'm trying to enjoy life. So if they don't use evidence, I don't have time for it. Otherwise, it just decreases my quality of life, and I'm trying not to do that. Who am I talking to? To drug users?
No.
Okay. So when we think about drug users, unions, and all of those sort of groups, they are overrepresented by pathological drug users.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I say to if those are the people who are listening, it's like, be careful when telling your story, because you don't have the only story. Many of us have stories, but people haven't come out of the closet. And so it would be really nice if we have a more representative sample of people who use drugs. It'd be nice if we had a larger representative. So if we have people who are identified as drug users, like the folks in the Drug Users Union, more power to them, mad props to them for being out of the closet. At least they're more courageous than most of the cowards who are in the closet. And I really mean that when I call people cowards, because they have the luxury of allowing people to be prosecuted and persecuted while they hide, and that's cowardly. And I'm trying to make sure that I don't behave cowardly.
Thanks, Carl.